Welcome to the Healthcare Workforce Podcast, brought to you by Espirita Workforce Solutions. In this series, we're talking to the most influential, agile and diverse leaders across the healthcare industry. We'll get an insight into their unique stories and hear their opinions on the future of health and care in the UK and beyond. This week, we're talking to Angela Rossi. With over 20 years of extensive experience within both public and independent healthcare organisations, Angela is a values-driven leader who is committed to creating strong, positive cultures from the ground up. Angela's held both UK-focused and global leadership positions and is currently Chief Human Resources Officer at Cleveland Clinic London. Angela, thank you so much for joining us today. Could we start with a little bit about you and your journey so far?
My first role after graduating from university was at a large NHS teaching hospital in London, a real baptism by fire. And I spent most of my days recruiting for paediatric and oncology nurses. I then moved to the private sector after about 3 years, and this is probably where I would say I saw the biggest growth in my career, and I obtained my first executive level role, which allowed me to step out of just leading the HR function and to be part of a senior team driving the success of a business. After that, I then had the opportunity to take up a corporate centre role at our parent company, Bupa. And it was there that I had the opportunity to gain some international experience, and that continued to support my development and growth. After 20 years, I opted to take a break from corporate world and undertook a 6-month program in executive coaching, which is where at that point in time I saw my career progressing. And I think when I look back, that wasn't meant to be, because before I had the opportunity to advance that coaching route, I was headhunted by a European healthcare company looking to enter the London market in the area of mental health and orthopaedics. This was my first exposure to a startup, and I surprised myself at how much I loved starting something from scratch, dealing with multiple levels of ambiguity, and as employee number 5, recruiting a full team to open a healthcare facility in London, as well as some M&A activity to further grow the business. And then, 6 years ago now, back in 2017, I was approached for support by a management consultant in my network who was doing some consultancy work for Cleveland Clinic, this big American company who was being talked about in industry about coming to the UK. And it was a good deed with no expected return from my side that resulted in me being headhunted for the CHRO role that I hold now at Cleveland Clinic London.
And obviously, Cleveland Clinic London, what a huge opportunity. But what was it specifically that inspired you to make this the next chapter of your story?
So when I was approached back then, it didn't feel like the right time. And that kind of talks to a little bit about being open when things don't necessarily make sense. I'd been at my previous employer for about 8 months. I was very, very committed to the vision and the priorities that were set out. But I also felt deep down that at that point in my career, this was the one that was going to give me the legacy role that I needed to really cement my career and probably bring together the previous 20 years of working in acute healthcare in central London. I was inspired about the fact that they wanted their chief HR officer to be a UK hire, and that was in comparison to every other role on the executive team, which was an expat that was coming over from the US to bring Cleveland Clinic London to life. I also think Cleveland Clinic's vision to bring a new model of healthcare to London and the ambition to make private healthcare more accessible to many more, and plus drive transparency in the private sector, for me, made it something incredibly rewarding and something that I desperately wanted to be part of at that point in my career.
You mentioned being the only UK member of the executive team at that point, and together you were responsible for bringing Cleveland Clinic, which is a very well-established US healthcare provider, to the UK. How did you make sure that your experience and knowledge were always considered and given the appropriate weight when it came to key decisions?
So you have to be super confident. There were many a time when I had to respond to a team of 8 colleagues who believed it had to be done a certain way because that was the Cleveland Clinic way. And being able to influence, strongly articulate, and stand up for what you felt was the right thing to do, all in pursuit of the business being successful here. This wasn't around or about someone being right or wrong. This was all in pursuit of ensuring that the ambition, the vision, and the mission of Cleveland Clinic in London would be a success.
And within your current role, you have a particular focus on culture and leadership. Can you tell us more about what that means to you?
Culture and leadership, for me, is all about, I think about being a role model. I think about leading from the front. I think about being true to your word. I think about it being more than what you talk about in a textbook. You've got to live it every day. People have got to feel it. I think you help keep culture alive by being an inspiration.
And who inspires you, Angela?
There's always one that jumps to mind whenever this question comes along, and certainly from a personal perspective, it would be my father. He came from Italy to England in the 60s. He didn't speak English. He certainly didn't come with lots of money to make it easier for him, but he was supported by family who'd already made the move from Italy to the UK. He worked hard, incredibly hard. He built great relationships. He genuinely cared about people, and those attributes helped him start up and set up a catering business in central London. And that element of care I'll go back to, because I think that's really deep inside of who I am, whether that be for the people he employed, the customers that he served, the suppliers that he worked with, or of course his family. That care, that compassion was deeply about who he was, and I have no doubt at all led to his success, personally, professionally, for himself. I think when I look at someone who inspired me professionally, I think back at my boss, my CEO at the Cromwell Hospital, a strong female leader who taught me so much and gave me so much support and empowerment, certainly gave me the greatest opportunity for the growth in my career when she appointed me to the executive team. And really, I'd say that was the catalyst in my career that sees me being where I am. It's one of the reasons I am where I am today.
And what's the biggest lesson that you've learned on your journey?
I think how important it is to have genuine empathy and compassion. Individuals without a deep desire to care, to listen, to support probably aren't best suited, certainly to the industry that I work in healthcare, or the career profession that I've chosen in HR. I'd also add that I think, to a point I made earlier, you need to be a role model and lead from the front. And I think back to the personal inspiration I cited earlier, which is my father. And I always remember as a teenager going into work with him and watch him in the family business. And I remember questioning once why he was sweeping the floor when he was the boss and he had staff to do that for him. And he said, as a leader, you should never expect someone to do something that you're not prepared to yourself. And I think that lesson works across sectors and has certainly served me well throughout my 25-year career.
And what's your advice to the new generation of healthcare leaders?
I would say, first of all, think early about the type of leader you want to be. When I reflect back, and I'm a great reflector, and an important attribute I think for people to have, I probably wasn't as strategic about this as I could have been. It worked out for me, but I know now, having cemented my personal purpose, which guides me every day, how much that has helped. I'd also advise new leaders to ensure they focus on building strong, diverse relationships and help others. I think it's here that you get the chance to learn more. You certainly have the opportunity to give more. And I'd also add to that to genuinely care about the people around you. I would also say, and I learnt this along the way, don't be a know-it-all, and don't think you have to act as superhuman who never stops and has all the answers. No one really admires or likes that. Certainly not anymore. It may have been a trait in the 80s, lunches for wimps, etc. But I think showing vulnerability and asking for help makes you real, and it will really draw people to you.
The qualities you talk about, such as authenticity, showing vulnerability, and humility, are now highly valued in the workplace. Is this perhaps the post-COVID legacy for leadership?
For sure. That willingness to show the true you, we all had to do that through the global pandemic. Everyone shared their reality. I just think with the new generations and recognising we have 5 generations in the workplace now, but certainly for us, the majority of our workforce are within the kind of 30 to 40 bracket. It's what people are demanding. It's an absolute expectation. People show it and people expect it from their leaders. And if they don't, then it's really difficult to make the connections with people now if you aren't willing to show that humility, show that vulnerability, admit it when you don't have the answers. But if you've built those great networks, if you've got that great team around you, you will get there in terms of it's okay to say you don't know.
And finally today, the pandemic changed many things in a relatively short period of time. What are the changes that you expect to see in the UK healthcare industry in the next 5 years?
I would say it's going to change significantly. I think we're certainly going to see more new entrants coming to the UK, like my last 2 employers have. And I think these new entrants in the market will help drive innovation across the industry, both locally and globally. I think we're going to see demand increase. We're going to have increasing numbers of patients. We have an aging population, which will need to be supported in a way we haven't had to in previous years. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how healthcare and social care will merge. And I'm curious to see how that's going to develop. I think we're certainly going to need a greater focus on proactive healthcare solutions to help manage costs and demand. It would be unusual for me not to talk about technology and AI. I think that will continue to grow, and that will include a growing demand for access to information. And then I also think, putting myself back in the HR space, we're going to need some radical change to ensure we have the healthcare workforce that is needed to meet that demand. And I think we need to go back to the root of how we attract into the various healthcare professions, and need to change the dial on how these groups are acknowledged and rewarded in society.
Angela Rossi, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for listening to the Healthcare Workforce Podcast, brought to you by Espirita Workforce Solutions. To hear more in our series of conversations with healthcare leaders, or for more healthcare workforce content, please subscribe to our channel, connect with us on LinkedIn, or visit espirita.co.uk. If you'd like to be featured on this podcast, or if you'd like to recommend someone to speak with us, just drop us a message at letstalk@espirita.co.uk.